Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastically talented Michael Che to talk all about his HBO series, That Damn Michael Che. And the thing I was really interested in starting by asking you about is the voice of the show, because obviously when you came onto SNL, that has such a storied history. It already has a really distinctive voice as a show. Whereas this, your DNA and your fingerprints are so clear on every single sketch and every single line that's been written. And so what was the difference in developing a project that was so purely your DNA?
Well, I mean, I think like we tried to do that consciously, you know. It's very hard to do because so many people have done sketch shows before and you've seen them done kind of every possible way. So we tried to go toward the narrative aspect of it uh and I tried to draw as much from personal experience and from stand-up bits that probably didn't work, but probably made more sense in a scene. And so, yeah, it did have a lot of, you know, my voice in it.
And then obviously by doing the show on HBO versus it being on network, there's certain places that you can take some of these sketches that you maybe wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And so what are some of the ways in which you feel like you were really able to push your voice in different ways purely based on the platform?
Well, SNL in particular is a different animal because for one, it's live. Most of it is live. And so the blocking for a sketch sometimes is tricky just to you might have a funny idea, but it reads funnier than it actually looks because of the way it has to be produced could hinder it. And then also SNL, you know, the sketches start and end, you know, the joke starts and end with the sketch, you know. For my show, I could kind of spill it out over a long period of time. It could be more of the entire episode. There's a punchline at the end of the episode. It could be straight for a while. Like I'm not kind of held to that rule. The real estate for SNL is a lot smaller, so you kind of got to get everything off in those 4 to 5 minutes, as opposed to here where we could give you 2 minutes and then we can come back to it and revisit it and give it more of a context. So it's a lot more freedom.
With that in mind, you do it so successfully in the exactly as you said, sometimes there's something where the payoff comes later, and you're really creating an overarching narrative thread throughout the entire series and throughout every episode. But within that, there's a lot of intimacy in the stories you're telling within. So how are you thinking not only about the story that we're telling for the next 3 minutes, but also how it fits into the next 20 minutes, the next 2 episodes, the whole six?
I tried to structure it a little bit like I would a stand-up set. That's kind of the only thing that I could liken it to, where I have an idea about, you know, a beginning, middle, and end, or really a beginning and end. And it's more so trying to get you to the end and the information that you need to know so that the end makes sense for you. And yeah, and then you just kind of fill in the blanks from there of, you know, what are some interesting things that could be told along the way. But really you starting with the setup and the punchline.
And in likening it to the idea of a stand-up set, is that also kind of where the idea of the interstitial moments where you're talking to camera came from as well?
Sort of, yeah. I thought because that came last, and for one, I'm not in a lot of the show in the sketches because originally I wasn't supposed to be in. Not I wasn't supposed to, but I wasn't planning on being in a lot of it, and HBO wanted me in it more, and I agreed. I wanted to be in it more, but you know, I didn't write myself in it because I didn't know how much I could execute with an SNL schedule because I knew we'd be shooting at the same time. So it was just really, really tough to. It was more of a COVID thing of trying to figure out how much I could do in it. You know, so I ended up having to write the interstitials to be like, well, this would be a way that I could be in it a lot more, and I can set up a lot more of the context so that a lot of the sketches you don't have to interpret it as much. You can kind of see exactly where it's going. It kind of helps a little bit, especially for the first 6 episodes where you're not really sure what this show is anyway. And I think it really, really made the show feel fresh.
And the majority of those interstitials, it's just you talking straight to camera, but there are a couple moments where there's someone off camera and we hear them coming back to you, like when you're talking about the disappointment of getting a steak at Arby's and you have someone on the other side and we hear what they're saying as well. Was that kind of just a more off the cuff moment, or was that an intentional thing to also include that voice?
It was very intentional to create an atmosphere. It was me and the writers of the show talking to each other about different things. And so I wanted it to be, I didn't want to do it straight to camera because I didn't want it to feel preachy. I wanted it to be conversational because it kind of loosens it up when it's a conversation. People are a little bit more freer. And also, like, the person you're talking about is Reggie Conquest, is very funny, and he's also in it throughout the show. Sometimes they come up with a punchline quicker than I can, and then that's fun. But it's real. It's all coming up organically. They don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what they're going to say. So I wanted that element too, which it felt different than, to me, what Chappelle's show did or what Key and Peele did, where they kind of talked to the audience and did bits. This was more just conversational to kind of hear how the train is rolling in my brain.
And in talking about the writers, how did you navigate the way that you wanted to set up and run the writers' room? Because, you know, you've mentioned that you were doing this at the same time as SNL, so you were having to piggyback between the two projects. So how did the writers' room flow for you on this project?
Well, we started the writers' room before SNL started. We did the shooting during SNL. The writers' room was really tricky to navigate because it was kind of in the height of COVID, so we couldn't be together. A lot of it was Zoom. A lot of it was we would go to the Creek and the Cave, which was a really, really cool club in New York. Now it's in Austin, but I know the owner of the Creek and the Cave, Rebecca Trent, she let us use her back patio. So we were outdoors, getting eaten by mosquitoes and bugs, trying to, you know, kind of one day a week. So it wasn't a real writer's room. It didn't have that kind of intimacy, but it was important to at least be together for, you know, even that limited amount of time to, you know, talk down ideas, read stuff out loud, and kind of come up with something. But it was really tough to navigate a writer's room during COVID. It was like nearly impossible. And you can see, as there's not that many shows have been produced during that time.
And, you know, given the fact that you're writing the show, you're producing it, you're show running it, it's your name in the title, you know, you're across every single creative decision and creative choice, but you're also then the person who's setting the tone and creating the environment of what it's going to be like for writers, producers, cast and crew to step into this world. So how did you want to navigate setting up that space, and what was the type of environment you wanted to create for everybody on set?
I didn't really think of it that way. I never really think of things that way. I try to just use common sense, and we skin that cat when it comes. Like, it's, you know, you don't think of it as you're a showrunner. You just think about what would make this moment better right now. Maybe we should have, what if the trailers were over here? Or what if, you know, what if we got food this time? Or what if we ate here? Like, you think of the decisions as they come, because you know, you can't really plan for everything. It's a lot like being a parent, you know, where you can prepare all you want, but until you're there, you know, it all changes, and you kind of have to step up for the things that you can't really prepare for. So my approach was kind of to just let things happen organically. And I think the set was fun.
When it comes to cast stepping onto the show, were there certain things that you wanted to have them know or to impart on them about the stylistic approach to the comedy within the show, or just anything about how you were setting up a lot of these sketches to make sure that everybody's performances were on the same page? Or is it very similar to the overall environment, which, you know, was just very organic as well?
It was very organic, and something that I learned at SNL, like when you work with good people, like if you work with a talented cast, you don't really have to, it's better to not give them notes initially, because they could bring something that you wasn't expecting, and it could be even better than you ever hoped. So a lot of times, you know, in SNL, I would just give them the script, and I know why I think it's funny. And once they read it, they might find something else that makes it funny, or a whole other move, or it might be something that takes in a different direction, and then we can talk about it. But to start, I like to always give people the freedom to just go with it and see what they see in it, because they're going to put themselves into it. And also, when you let them start with a foundation, they have some ownership of that role. And, you know, it's better than just all my decisions. You know, you kind of got to let good people be good.
And when it comes to guest stars, you've got an amazingly eclectic group. You know, it's everybody from Method Man to Billy Porter. And obviously, one of your strengths and skill sets as a writer is being able to write material and really craft characters that speak to a performer's strengths. And so I was interested in the journey of that on this show in particular, with a lot of the guest stars, in finding a character and finding a sketch that was really going to bring out their best comedic sensibilities for the show.
Well, thank you, first of all. But yeah, a lot of that too is just when you're writing it, you hear certain voices in your head and you're like, then you just start writing for them. But that's also from SNL. I mean, we write, you have to kind of know, the cast voice. You have to kind of think what would the host be able to execute, what would be funny to see them do. And, like you get that kind of practice. And that's kind of how I learned how to write that way.
I thought it was interesting that you've said before how actually comedians can be a little bit more challenging when they come on as hosts on SNL, just because they come in with a certain sensibility already. And so what are the ways in which, when somebody doesn't already come in with that comedic sensibility and experience, it's actually easier to write sketches for them?
Well, it's not even so much their sensibility, it's also their standard, So sometimes they've been funny the way they've been funny for so long. So you kind of have to build a trust with them. They have to be able to trust, okay, you're going to take me to a laugh and I'll do what you say, but they don't give it up that easy. For somebody that's not funny, they say, look, if you're a comedian, just tell me what to say, I'll say it. Before, you can't do that with Dave Chappelle. You can't do that with Kevin Hart. You can't do that with certain people that are masters at making people laugh. They're going to have different choices. So it's a little trickier. But with someone that doesn't do comedy, an athlete or somebody that's in drama or, that really doesn't do this, they'll trust you. They trust the writers a lot more.
And you're obviously so adept as well at writing pieces that really capture a lot of personal intimacy and then also bring in larger social and political conversations. And the show really leans very heavily into that a lot. But, we're doing everything from having conversations about Black Lives Matter, down to reflections from your childhood. And so how did you want to interweave those two different styles of storytelling into the series with your sketches?
I wanted to take on subjects and from the perspective of what it felt like, not necessarily what it was. I think I didn't want to do a sketch that was like, this is what cops need to do. I wanted to show you what it feels like to be approached by cops, or what it feels like to find out a family member is a cop, and what it feels, why would somebody want to be a cop from my community, or, what that conversation is. And I just wanted to show what it felt like for most of those instances, because people are going to, they're going to come to their own conclusions as to what should be done and what shouldn't be done and what's okay and what's not okay. But I think the honest answer is always, but what does it feel like? I think that's what people go back to, and that's, how they relate to each other more so. So that was a perspective, and that's kind of the running theme for everything. What is it like to be in those relationships? What is it like to produce comedy in an era when there's so many great comedians and, all of that stuff?
And it feels like in watching it that the comedy isn't there to necessarily make you feel comfortable. It is there to make you have a conversation and to question things. And was that something that was very intentional?
Yeah, I mean, of course, honesty is always controversial, and not honesty and right or wrong, honesty. And this is exactly what this moment feels like. Or this is truly what it looks like. So I was expecting that. And I think that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes you want to watch the rest of it, is something that kind of challenges you, something that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit uneasy, because it means we're not really working that muscle that much. And that's why it's fun. It's like I don't know, it's like a baby eating a lemon for the first time, like that kind of, but they always go back for it. They always want more. So that's kind of what I go for.
You also don't shy away from exploring some of your own vulnerabilities and insecurities within the show as well. And what was the journey of navigating how you wanted to be able to explore that through sketch comedy in the show?
Well, again, in order for me to be honest about other things, I got to be honest with myself. I got to really be able to say, look, this is something I'm insecure about, or this is something that I'm not right about, that I'm not perfect toward, you know. So you got to be able to show that, because that's what builds the trust, you know. You have to be able to take the same liberty with yourself that you would at someone else's expense, you know. So that was also very important. I didn't want it to feel like I was the good guy in every episode, or just the bad guy comedically in every episode. I wanted to actually be honest about certain ways that I felt, even if it's for a moment, I feel that way. And even if I know better, you kind of want to show it.
I also wanted to ask you about working with Oz Rodriguez, who directed all of the episodes. And I thought it was an interesting choice as well that you've mentioned that Oz was also there throughout the table read process, and how the two of you really collaborated on finding the directorial voice of the show, and why it was so important to have them there right at those beginning stages as well, when you were finding the voices of all these sketches.
Well, it was very difficult throughout, because, you know, like I said, you have ideas. We're both, you know, we're both in control of the situation. So we both have very strong opinions as to what something should look like and something should be like. But the thing about Oz, that the reason why I wanted to work with him, is because he makes everything look good. Like, everything looks really, really good. And you can tell that it was a lot of thought and put into, you know, what the optics of the show is. And he was right on the money with it. But yeah, it's very tricky to have like strong beliefs as to what the direction of the show is, and you're dealing with a director. SNL spoils you, because as a writer on the show, you're kind of in charge of everything, you know. You know, it's kind of a writer-friendly show. I think it's because Lauren was a writer. So the writers are there for the shoots, and the writers are there during the direction, and they're giving notes, and no other part of Hollywood is like that, I don't think. You know, usually the writer writes it and gets out of the way. So I'm probably very annoying to have to direct, but I think we figured out a middle ground that made it work out okay.
And when it comes to sketch comedy, it can be really easy to underestimate the value of elements like costumes and props and, you know, wigs, makeup, and how all of those come into play so much. Is that something, even at the early stages of developing the idea of what a sketch can be, that you're already starting to think about and map out some of those details?
Yeah, you start looking. I actually wish that I did a better job at that. That's one of the things that I think we could improve on, is the attention to detail, because I do think people that see the shows, they'll pick up little things that they're like, oh, that's very, the person who did this did all of their research. You know, it's just like when you do interviews, you can ask a certain question that shows that you've done the homework, or that you like me talking to you right now. The fact that you've seen the show, that I've talked to a lot of people that haven't even really seen it, and they have like all these kind of crazy, weird questions, but I'm talking to you, and I know that you like watched it, or at least you pretend to. but but either way, the attention to detail is something that makes people feel a little bit warmer, and it's also a way to trust. You know, it's also kind of gives people that insight, and I think that that's something that we could do more of too.
And then I also wanted to ask you about SNL in terms of having a live audience. And obviously there was a period of time which you were doing shows over Zoom, and then you had the ability to come back and to have smaller audiences in person. And with spending so much time having to adjust your complete comedic stylistic tendencies towards not having an audience, not being able to read the room, have that immediate feedback, did you find that then when you had it again after several months, that it just naturally flowed back very easily and was very easy to kind of recalibrate to that? Or did it take a little bit of time to feel comfortable going back into that space again?
Well, it's never easy, but it was quick in the fact that we kind of came back, and it felt like normal again very quickly. You know, I mean, as normal could be. It was the most normal we felt, you know. Our last episode was for a full vaccinated audience, and that felt insane. Like it felt like I was in Madison Square Garden. It was just an energy, and it felt like I never performed for that many people before. And it was only like 300 people, but it felt crazy. But throughout the year, yeah, you have just having people there, just seeing faces. it's just a show. You know, you start seeing the same people in the hallways, the same crew, you know, the same writers, Lauren, and then the same stresses and the same nightmares and all of the stuff that goes into making the show. So you kind of pick it up pretty quickly. But it's difficult. It's difficult because the job was hard when we had everything. So now that there's certain hindrances, it's 10 times harder.
Yeah. I'm also really interested in how the part of the process when you're doing the warm up really influences the final show and whether you allow it to or not, because it's feeding off of an understanding the energy of the room and the audience that is specifically there that night. But at the same time, they're not the entire audience for the show, but they do play into what comes out on the broadcast. And you're still sometimes writing things right down to when you go on air. So do you allow those moments to influence or edit or change anything, even if it's just minutia with pacing?
It's funny you say that, because it's not that you change anything based on them, but I do know what to expect based on them. So like if it's like a young screamy audience, I'm like, oh, they're gonna cringe at some of this stuff. Like you kind of know what to expect. All right, don't expect a lot on this joke because they might be a little younger and sensitive, or they might not be here for news, or you know, like you kind of start to figure out the audience. But sometimes you'll get an audience and they're going crazy for just cast coming out, you know, like just for the cold open, they're going crazy. And then you're like, okay, these are fans of the show. They understand. We're like the only show on television that the audience isn't coming to see us necessarily. Sometimes they're coming to see Bruno Mars, or sometimes they're coming to see K-pop, or sometimes they're coming to see, you know, whoever. They might be coming to see Justin Bieber, whoever it is. We share the audience with whoever our hosts are and whoever our music guest is. So it's tricky, but it's also fascinating, and it makes us kind of have to write from a more honest place of, well, try to make this funny, because they're not just here to laugh at everything you say. They might not even know who you are. You know, you got to earn everything.
And when it comes to audiences for your stand-up shows as well, you're doing it in such a multitude of different places with different types of audiences. And so I was interested in your process in how you really read the room and change the pacing, because I've even, you know, heard you talk about British audiences. And as a Brit myself, I'll acquiesce to this. Like, we're a little quieter. We give the joke a little bit more time before the laughs come. And as a comedian, that's a completely different flow to being in the room for comedy in New York at like Caroline's. And so how do you really look at who the audience is and feel the energy of the room, even just as you're first walking out, and then throughout the evening adjust some of your pacing and your timing and the way that you're leaning into certain jokes for them?
I try not to start right away. That's one of my little tricks. I try not to start right away. I try to just listen to what they sound like still, you know, just to see what they are resting. And then I try to throw them off guard. I try to throw myself off guard too a lot of times. I'm usually in my own head trying to work toward being creative and spontaneous and being in every situation. So sometimes the audience, I don't really care what they're doing, because I'm already working on something to challenge myself. But yeah, you're right. Certain audiences have certain vibes, and the more you know about it, the more you can kind of calibrate how you're going to perform. Sometimes it's a lot of couples, and you realize, okay, well, they might be uncomfortable laughing about certain things. So you know, because their wife's here, or because their husband's here, or, you know, whatever. So you kind of have to make them feel safe. It's all about making them feel safe and making people be able to laugh as an instinct and not laugh after they've thought about it. You know, you want the reactions coming quickly. You don't want people thinking about what they're laughing at. You want them just listening and reacting. And you gotta make them very comfortable first.
Yeah. And when you're on SNL and you're doing the dress run through and you're under the bleachers with Lauren and he's giving you notes throughout, what are actually the most valuable types of notes that he tends to be able to give you in that situation that really allow you to pivot certain things? Or is it just a stress ride?
I don't know. They're always valuable because he's just got to get this on television, right? So he doesn't care about, you ever see the movie Pulp Fiction?
Yeah.
You know Winston the Wolf?
Yeah.
When at the end, what's the actor's name? I forget his name. But
oh God. I can see the face in my head.
Oh, he's in so many like gangster movies.
I know. Everything.
Anyway, Winston the Wolf is the character name, and he comes to clean up when they have a dead body in the garage or whatever. And he's very curt, and he's quick, and so it's like that zero emotion. That's the thing with Lauren. It's like when you're under the bleachers, he's telling you what to do to fix it. He's not there to make you feel better. Say, I liked it. It's none of that. It's just how you fix it in this short amount of time so that we can put it on television. And once you build that callus, and once you kind of build that tolerance of that ego bruise of this wasn't funny or whatever it was, because if it's not, he'll tell you. Then it becomes super productive, because then you're on that page too. You're not taking any of it personal. You're like, okay, is this going to be good for the show? Because it's going to take the spot of something else that people cared about, possibly. And you don't want to put something on that's not going to work. So you start to take that criticism, and you start to take that advice a lot less to heart and more toward fixing it.
And in working on the show,
does that make sense at all?
It does so much. And in working on the show, you started out as a guest writer, then it was a staff writer, and then moved up to head writer. And in each of these trajectory moments in your career, has it changed and evolved the way that you work each time you're taking a step into a new role on a show like that? Because it's like you learn how one job operates, and then you're kind of stepping up into a different position almost.
What do you mean, outside of SNL?
Within SNL, so like the trajectory and like difference for you in how you worked from like being a guest writer to a staff writer, right, from staff writer to head writer.
Well, the thing about SNL is that it's such a well-oiled machine. Like there's so many, you're never really alone in anything you're doing. So if I'm a guest writer, there's two other guest writers, and we can kind of figure it out together. And when you become a staff writer, there's so many other staff writers that'll help you out. And, that'll assist you on a sketch so that you can go through it with them. It's not like you're just kind of on your own on an island. And then even head writer, I was one of 3 head writers when I first came on, or 4 actually. So even then it wasn't like just all the pressures on me, it was shared. So it's a lot less stressful than it could be if it was just me on my own and I had to figure it out and nobody to kind of commiserate with. But SNL is such a machine that you're kind of always protected with somebody that's much better at your job doing it next to you, so that you can kind of learn and pick it up. And before you know it, you're doing the same thing for someone else. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, I've been here 10 years. Like it's that kind of thing where you never feel that way. It always feels like you're still learning your job, because you probably are.
And when you look back at the process and the journey of making that damn Michael Che, there were so many obstacles, from the pandemic to shooting the whole thing in 4 months. But what did you feel were the biggest personal challenges in terms of getting the show together, writing it, developing it, find your voice and making it?
The biggest personal challenge, I think, was trusting myself and, feeling like, okay, I'm going to stand on this decision and I'm going to stand by it, whether it works or it doesn't work. That was like the biggest obstacle. But it really wasn't that tough. I've got to be honest, because it was, I mean, like I said, I do Saturday Night Live. So it's any other show you do is going to be probably smaller than that, and less pressure than that. You just want it to be good, you just want it to be good, and you want to take chances and fight for things that people say, well, you shouldn't put that in. And you're like, no, you know what, this is good, and this is going to work for who it's supposed to work for. That's like the toughest thing, is having those fights. But again, when you have Lauren, when you have Aaron Doyle, and HBO Max was actually really, really cool about a lot of the decisions that we really, really believed in. So it was kind of cool. Yeah. It could have been a lot worse. Like I've heard stories about people's first seasons being a lot worse than that, and I can't complain.
Well, congratulations on everything that you've done with those 6 episodes. It's really great. And thank you so much for talking with us today, Michael.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I'm sorry you had to read so much about me, but thank you. This was great.